Welcome back to Mastering Change.
Today we're joined by Quint Boa, founder of Synima, a production company creating short-form animation to support mental health communication and education.
Quint shares how animation can help people engage with trauma safely by using metaphor, making difficult experiences easy to talk about without re-traumatising.
He talks about its practical strengths too, how it can be cost-effective, emotionally accessible, and used by therapists and educators in a wide range of settings.
It's a creative, thoughtful conversation about finding new ways to support healing. Here's Quint.
Quint Boa, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the podcast today. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Em. Good morning, Araminta.
Hi, Quint. Welcome. So as most of our podcast listeners will now know, we start every podcast with a little game. I've got a couple of cards here, and on each card there is a prompt, and the idea is that you will use that prompt to kind of tell a little story about yourself that will help you connect with us and to our audience. So,
Yes.
the top card says, "A time I felt very lost, ...
A time I felt very lost. Well, I'd probably leap straight into the subjects that we're going to be talking about today. The time I felt really lost was when I was at the tail end of my drinking, which was about 12 years ago now. And I was on the carousel of crap, I think I called it in my head, of just standard stuff, stereotypical standard stuff of waking up and wanting to, craving, and then having a drink, and then drinking through, and then starting again the next day. So that was sort of end stage alcoholism, which I got over and addressed, and now I'm feeling a lot more found. But yes, there was a certain loss of some sort of compass there. Prior to that, probably a bit of a childhood trauma. When my father was an alcoholic, my father was Bruce Boa. He was some of your listeners may know he was an actor, so he was the American who wanted a Waldorf salad in Fawlty Towers. He wanted apple, celery, walnuts, grapes from Basil Fawlty, and he was also in Empire Strikes Back and Full Metal Jacket and all the rest. But that was a bit of a tough time growing up there. There's a little bit disorienting, to say the least. There's a couple of spots there where I felt disoriented.
I can definitely relate to that for sure.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a good place to transition into the kind of conversation that we're going to have today. But if I could first ask you, please just introduce yourself to camera, say your name, and then just give us a flavour of who you are, what you do, and what you care about.
So my name is Quint Boa. I am, how I would introduce myself, as founder of a company called Synima, which is a video and animation production company based in London, New York, Los Angeles, and Amsterdam. That's how I make my living. But my raison d'etre is mental health, and in particular, treatment of or diagnosis and treatment of presenting problems through the use of animation. I personally, I think that animation is a totally underutilized resource within psychotherapy, and I would like to be, if it's not too highfalutin, the Walt Disney of mental health animation. My background is in acting and presenting, and then I got into cable bashing. So I worked on Top of the Pops for 15 years as a camera operator and the National Lottery, and then I got involved in psychotherapy. About 30 years ago, I got my UKCP certificate, and then I've been working both those two avenues for most of my life, really. And as I now really as I at this point in my life, what I want to do is just really focus on psychotherapy and really focus on animation, especially with the advent of AI, which I'm sure we'll touch upon in the conversation later.
That's a great thing for us to dive into. So let's start by set your vision for us for the use of animation in the context of trauma, mental health, well-being, and healing.
so history of animation. We could go into the history of animation. Animation is as old as film. It started with stop motion animation back in the 1800s, and then sort of potted history. We all remember Mickey Mouse, one of the largest brands in the world. So he came around in the 1930s. Walt Disney expanded the use of animation in motion pictures with a series of films in the 1950s and 60s, and that carries through to the present day with Disney and Frozen and what have you. In the 1990s, animation went through another flip with computer-generated animation. That's with Jurassic Park. So when Sam Harris looked out over the top of that Jeep and saw the Diplodocus, that was a seminal moment. At the same time, Jaws was going. So Jaws had 3 animated sharks, none of which worked very well, which it's another story there. But then CGI continued on. Toy Story came out, and that was the first wholly animated film that used animation. And then what happened in about 2013, 2014, because of computer software and because of the high speed of just general computers, animation became possible in the corporate world. And so what my company did was we started using animation within the corporate sphere. So we started producing animations for Fortune 500 companies who previously couldn't do it. And the great thing about animation is if something is too big, too small, or too complex, you have to go to animation. So Emma, if you imagine that you have 2 planets crashing into one another, you have to have animation. If you're talking about a microphage eating an invasive bacteria, you have to go to animation. If you're talking about how an airport works, you've got 750 commercial airliners going into an airport. How do you show the complexity of that working? And so at the time, I still had a private practice dealing with substance abuse, and I was looking at producing animations for corporations to develop ideas around, for example, high frequency trading for the financial sector, or the power of the latest server for the tech sector. And suddenly I realized, oh, hang on, pretty much around the time of leading up to COVID. Wait a second, we have this mental health crisis going on. We need to generate animations that describe some of these issues that are going on with people. And then COVID happened, and suddenly everyone was in lockdown. There were a lot of anxiety around, a lot of mental health issues, and still mental health issues around, but mobile phones were ever present. And so one way of getting animation and getting the information around presenting problems such as trauma and anxiety and substance abuse and domestic abuse was to produce animations and put them out free of charge on, so it's just something banging against my shed up there, onto social media. And with specific regard to why animation, I think, is underutilized. If we look at trauma, and my background when I started psychotherapy was working within employee assistance programs with trauma, and so I would go into groups who had been affected by some traumatic activity. I'll go into a specific vignette if that's okay. So in 1995, there was a call center, and the people at the call center were having a Christmas shindig, and there was a mezzanine level within the venue. And one of the managers and one of the members of staff were so drunk that they fell off the mezzanine level and they went splat onto the floor and died, both of them, which brought the entire call center to a grinding halt. So the EAP sent me in with a couple of other people to talk to the people within the call center. And at that time, we were using what was called the Mitchell 7-point plan, which was what the British Army used post-Falklands War in order to look at, in order to try to process trauma, with the view of getting all of those employees back to work as quickly as possible. And one of the things that I realized there was that the first thing I realized was that people, when they're experiencing trauma, see, I'll just go back another step. The thing about trauma is when you're treating it as a psychotherapist, trauma is something that happens to normal people, and they're put into an extraordinary situation or circumstance, and so they're having to process that. Some people, so it's unusual in that regard from other slightly unusual with regard to that compared to other presenting problems, in that it is sort of a progressive thing. In trauma, suddenly, bang, it happens. You've got to deal with it. So you see a road traffic accident, or you're experiencing, something. And the people who experience trauma, unfortunately, also experience firsthand things like, for example, flashbacks, olfactory flashbacks, or visual flashback, auditory flashbacks. And those symptoms in and of themselves can make you feel like you're going, quote unquote, mad. And if the first thing that I started to do when I was dealing with trauma was to go in and was talk to people and say, right, hands up if you're experiencing this. Hands go gingerly up. That's absolutely normal, don't you? That is essentially biologically adaptive, that you are experiencing that. And you could just see the relief come away from them. And then we could actually get on with the work of talking about what they'd experienced. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that trauma is essentially part of the problem with trauma. And you know this from your work with Bessel van der Kolk, is the body keeps the score. You lose the power to make sense of the world through language, because whatever happens is it makes you lost for words. And what animation can do is it can provide a route back to trauma, to try to get you to relate to it. Why does it do that? It does that because a lot of language is symbolic and metaphorical. So we say we have a knot in our stomach. So language is metaphorical and symbolic. What else is? Animation is. So animation is a way of getting you through. I mean, if you used video, for example, and you showed somebody who'd been in an RTA, road traffic accident, another car crash, you might be at risk of really triggering them and overexposing them to the same event. But with animation, you can refer to it metaphorically, symbolically, and make it more accessible to that person. And in that way, obviously as part of multimodal intervention, animation can be therapeutic.
I think what fills me with hope, but also fills my day, is the vast array of approaches, ideas, concepts, modalities, products, services, propositions that exist in this field. As somebody before I came into this field who had no idea and thought there's maybe 2 or 3 tools in the kit if you ever suffer with mental health or but actually there's so much. Where do you start, Quint? Where do you see the biggest wins in kind of mainstream education or democratization of what's known in this field that will change the trajectory of that kind of human experience? Because the need is just getting kind of greater every day. Where do you start?
Well, I think I totally concur with everything you said. I think that there is an enormous, to use an expression, addressable market for animation, just through social media. If we have qualified, and I have to stress this because there's so many quacks, snake oil salesmen out there, unqualified people talking about this. If we can write, and honestly, it's as simple as this: you're writing a voiceover, you pick the animation to live behind it. But if you have a qualified person writing a voiceover, that voiceover is peer reviewed, everybody agrees that this is safe to go out. You then create a storyboard to live behind the voiceover, you create the animation, and then you can put it out free to air. Okay, and you can get to hundreds of thousands of people really, really quickly. I mean, let's just talk about anxiety. Okay, so the other thing we're doing, is I think anyway, is not to address it at the level of this is anxiety. Make sure when you get on a plane, have a paper bag, or this is depression. Bring in the black dog. I think people, I mean, Gen Zers, let's say, are far more articulate around psychological concepts. So they understand a little bit about attachment theory. They understand Freudian concepts. They understand
the nervous system, for example.
yeah, well, yeah, and yeah, they understand how diet affects the nervous system. I mean, if you look at that incident that happened over the weekend with that poor couple, well, those two poor unfaithful cheating couples, being caught at the Coldplay concert, and they were caught in the kiss cam, and the amount of discourse over social media that was quite sophisticated about what was going on, what are the dynamics behind infidelity. This is Esther Perel's terrain, obviously relationship therapy. Then also let's look at it in terms of addiction. What were they doing, putting their affair on full display? Was there some sort of dopamine rush? I mean, to go to the neurochemical behind it. So the quick wins, I think the wins are to look, for example, at anxiety and say, well, okay, we have different sorts of anxiety. We have general anxiety. We have anxiety born of childhood trauma. So let's look at, so I do some work with NACOA, the National Association of Children and Alcoholics. And so we know that there is a correlation between alcohol in parents and alcoholism in later life in people. We don't know what that is, but it does seem to be there. And why might that be there? That might be there because when you're a child and you're exposed to behavior which is inconsistent, say, you learn to read from a very early age whether or not there's alcohol in the family. That could be the difference between you getting hit or getting hugged when your dad comes in. So that degree of vigilance becomes second nature to you. And as you get older, it becomes hypervigilance. You live with this kind of anxiety and you feel comfortable with that sort of anxiety, but then it only takes a little bit more and suddenly you're going over the edge, and you may, self-medicate as a result of that. And that self-medication can take on a life of its own. Framing it in that way, using a pamphlet to somebody who's recovering from alcohol, they won't be able to hear it. Their prefrontal cortex will be shot, probably because they've been drinking so much. They will have a lack of agency. They won't be able to understand concepts like that. If you show somebody a video, it'll cost them an awful lot of money, and you'll have to jump through all sorts of regulatory hoops to produce it. But producing an animation is a relatively inexpensive way to get those ideas over. And by the way, you can put it into every single language. You can create social media edits. You can create full-length edits. And on the end of every slate, you can put, and by the way, here are some resources local to you that you could reach out to and get support with. So, if an average animation, let's just pull a figure out there. Let's say it costs £10,000. You can make you can make amends to that. You can put it into any language you want for, say, an additional 500 quid. You can put an end slate on the back of it to go into every single primary care trust for, a couple hundred quid. How long is it going to take? An hour?
So the answer really is it can democratize anything. It can educate and inform around any concept that needs mass socialization in multiple formats and languages.
Yeah, and it's totally free to air. I mean, it's the most cost-effective comms resource around, which is why our corporate clients use it. So why is, I don't want to name names in it, but why are big Fortune 500 companies using this stuff? Because it's cost-effective. They've got 100,000 employees all over the world. If there's a company initiative, it goes out in an animation, everybody gets it. And they can see that they get it, and they can see they've watched it as well, by the way. So why don't
I think there's also
Yeah.
there's also a real opportunity as well to create a distinctive style with animation that leans into brand values, and you can actually create a feeling, behaviors, thought patterns, meaning, and memorability through these animations.
Exactly.
It's because they can be anything. They can, any style, and they can really reflect the tone and the culture and the ethos of an organization, which is why, again, I think the corporate culture picked up on them. Because,
So I understand how they can be used for communication and for education, but you touched upon earlier, and I think for our audience specifically, what's most interesting would be how they can be used therapeutically in practice. Is that something you see it as do you see animation being able to use? You mentioned at the very beginning in kind of like diagnosis and treatment. I don't quite understand how you would use animation in diagnosis, and you kind of touched on it in treatment, but I'd like you to elaborate on that a bit.
Okay, well, let's look at diagnosis for ADHD. At the moment, we've got a huge uptick in the number of people who have ADHD. They're not being diagnosed. So they're not, or they're falling, according to Panorama, they're being diagnosed by psychologists in order to get their meds. Now, if CAM's waiting list is, unfortunately, 6 months to maybe 18 months. If people need help before that. And if you're neurodivergent, if you have an animation that can communicate that these may be markers for ADHD, or these may be markers for something else, then not only does the person who's neurodivergent understand it, bearing in mind they're going to be less likely to read, but also the caretakers as well, like the parents around them or any other healthcare professionals around. And to your point, Emma, it can provide a language and a narrative around the diagnosis of a presenting problem. So in terms of the diagnosis, it provides a free of charge, basically, if you're looking at that diagnosis on social media, or on a website, or on LinkedIn. Diagnosis of a presenting problem, but it also, so just this, for example, go back to anger. I was asked by a friend of mine who was a teacher who'd been beaten up at school, unfortunately, which happens, so often. And she said, "Quint, will you stop making animations for bloody insert name of big bank here? Can you do one for anger?" So we did an animation for anger. And the way she uses it, she goes up to kids who are in trouble, special educational needs, and shows them the anger video. We've done stills from the anger video, which they can put down as cards on the table, and then the teacher can go through those cards and say, is there anything on the table here that really speaks to you? Because we're not talking about anger, we're talking about the things that ran up to the anger. Did you eat last night? How was sleep last night? How are your parents last night? And those other, it's a much less evasive, more invasive, more practical way of getting to some key themes that could be going on with that person.
I think it's not only diagnosis, it's like identification, because you've used an example of ADHD and the example there of anger, but also in the context of addiction, sometimes an animation can help someone feel, you can identify there is a problem. I think I've seen, but in a really kind of non-judgmental way. You've talked about the ability to kind of just educate. So come from a position of really important clinical, it's got to be curated and created true to the most helpful knowledge and pathways forward. But it's not only about diagnosis, it's just about being able to identify or being able to understand what's happening in that case of anger. It's just, it takes the sting out of the situation.
I think, and I also think when you're talking about neurodivergent, I do see an application there. I do see it being useful, just because from my own experience of getting diagnosed as a neurodivergent individual, I did it privately, but the process there are so many pages and pages, and I was like, with someone with ADD and autism, like, to have to go through and fill out all of these pages and pages of form, took me ages. I couldn't, I just wasn't. It definitely wasn't neurodivergent informed.
Yeah.
Assessment process.
Yeah. And if you think that with the reason we did the ADHD animation, the first reason was because UCL were doing a study that up to, I think it was 1 in 4, 25% of prison inmates have got masked ADHD. So they start taking MDMA or alcohol in order to quiet themselves down. They then get into trouble with the law. Next thing they know, they're incarcerated. And this is ADHD. If they had the ADHD diagnosed prior to, it's interesting. Or whilst they're incarcerated, let's show them the video, and maybe they'll identify with what's going on. Not in a, as to your point, and not in a preachy sort of way, but in a way that's accessible and relatable. And that's what animation does. It's not on the nose like video. With video, you look at a video and your prejudices start coming to the fore. You start analyzing and looking into it. But with animation, you suspend. This is what Walt Disney was all about. This is why this is why some of the biggest films ever made were animations, and some of the biggest brands in the world, because they're relatable. People suspend something when they watch an animation because they know anything's possible, and anything is possible. And furthermore, well, I guess what we haven't touched on is you can do a animation, put it out, and using social media, you can get feedback on it. And if you want to adapt the voiceover, 2 shakes of a lamb's tail, and you've done it. Can you put a little bit about this in? I'm interested in a bit more about this. Okay, let's do another animation. Let's rework. Let's create a digital asset bank of that first animation, pick out the bits that you want, redo the animation, recreate something in that same style, and put it out again. This is not an expensive process at a time when everyone's talking about money and cost of living and the cost of, the NHS. This is really low cost, high effectiveness approach.
I wonder also, there's a point around animation where it can be more abstract or more conceptual rather than video is so pointed that you bring so many biases when you consume it. And animation can be very detailed but it can also be quite big picture. So, and doesn't allow for your brain to that kind of prefrontal cortex to engage and start to bring in all of those sort of sub narratives while you're trying to kind of get the main learning. So I think there's also a real opportunity at that very high level to get the kind of attraction and the reassurance that's required to pull people through. I mean, in marketing, it's that top of the funnel bit. How do you kind of get people in and engaged so that they can create, pull themselves down and through the information and the knowledge? So, I can see huge application in this space. It's just where to start, isn't it? Where to go first? And I think probably some of your early animations, the ones that you've done for CAMS, the one that you've done on Anger, that are all available on your website. People should look at those because they definitely gave me inspiration as to where else you could go with animation as a vehicle for this kind of education.
Oh, thanks so much, Em. I mean, they're all free to download and free to use if anybody wants to use them. But those are just fledgling steps. I mean, the possibility is huge. Like you say, for organizations can create a suite of animations to support their staff, all in brand guidelines, and free to air within the organization, and they can use the latest tech to see who's watched them and who hasn't. I mean, I tell you who is doing it is HR, learning and development for training and for compliance. They're doing character-based animations and character-based animations that used to be hellishly expensive to produce, but that is now the area using AI that things are getting much more cost effective and falling within corporate budgets.
Well, I think, Quint, you and I have come from the same world, which is out of this space, which is the corporate world, the consumer, the kind of that world that knows how to compel behaviors, create meaning and memorability with tools that are available to everyone, but really underutilized in this field of trauma, mental health and well-being. So as we speak, I see this, I can see it very clearly, how you take tools from one space and use them in this space that is looking to you know, change the human trajectory of humanity for the better, and looking to create opportunities for people to live with greater ease and comfort, to educate them so they feel less isolated, and where we started this, lost and alone, and how they can take that forward to support themselves. I think it's probably down to people like us now to really find those opportunities to apply those tools and to show people what's possible. Just like in the corporate space, they know what's possible. They see it in their bottom line. They see it in the way that they measure their performance.
Yeah.
Our bottom line looks very different. It looks like individual and collective health and healing. Okay, I'm going to ask you the same question that we ask all of our podcast guests.
Yes.
It's a big one. If we zoom out and look at the big macro context, geopolitical challenges, climate crisis, then we come down to society and how that's really changed and shifted. COVID accelerated it, but it was happening already. Then down to communities, and we maybe don't even know the people that we live close to anymore, and kind of community activities, there's less investment in it and less time. Come down to kind of families or work relationships or friendship, significant others. There's lots of reasons for those relationships to become frayed and fractured. There's a lot going on, basically, whether you look at the big picture or really that kind of individual experience. If there was a single lever for change, a button that you could push, a movement that you could make first to create the kind of change that we need to see in the world, what would that be?
Well, I think the good news is that it's already happening. I mean, I'm going to keep banging on about animation, but what I'm hearing now is that, and in schools now, you can create stop motion animation yourself. The kids are doing this themselves, so they can anthropomorphize, a cup and a bowl of sugar and a teaspoon, and they can turn that into a little story. And I was speaking to a woman last week who was talking about her son who has some challenges. He's using stop motion animation in order to express himself. That's going to go up online. That's going to be seen by other people. That's going to provoke other people or stimulate other people to create other animations. And hopefully we're going to have this sort of groundswell of creativity, all exploring these ideas in creative and relatable ways that are going to, I think, profoundly shift the way we think about a lot of these presenting problems. It's not going to be so siloed and so professionalized as it is at the moment. There's going to be more people talking about their lived experience, and that's going to, I hope, is really going to speak to other cohorts with the same, presenting problems.
I love that. Really distinctive answer. Great.
I really also, I think Emma and I spoke to someone else on the podcast who'd done a bit, I think it was a piece of art, but it might have included animation. And they were using it so that people could go and express their feelings. If kids can use animation to express themselves or use things that they kind of relate to or resonate with, I think that could be a really great way of using animation in treatment specifically for adolescents and young children, I think, in helping them get in touch with their emotions, understand their feelings, communicate their own, as you said earlier on this podcast, communicate. When you have suffered a traumatic event, often you don't have words, so the animation can be helpful for kids to kind of express themselves and work through that process, I think. So yeah, great.
Fantastic. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I totally agree. These tools are becoming available for everyone to use. Stop motion first, and now using Runway and Midjourney, more sophisticated tools. They're in the hands of professionals at the moment. I mean, we're using it, but in 6 months' time, we're talking about software that costs maybe $10 a month, and they're producing Pixar-style animations. Now, there's obviously some controversy around that, but I mean, Netflix just this weekend brought out a Gen AI scene in one of their movies. So, I can see this is only going one way, but that's good news. It's great news for for children and as you said, Mint, they children and young adolescents who are going to be the first, who are going to be the early adopters of this technology, and producing content that speaks and makes sure that people, if they are lost for words and if they are feeling rudderless, they have some structure to hold on to, and if we can help them to create groups around that, then they can meet and they can coalesce into programs that'll support them.
I mean, I can see application for that in schools though as well. Like you can have kids, and you sort of said that someone you spoke to had a child who had probably a special educational needs, and he was using stop motion to sort of communicate for himself. But I guess if we have classes of, I mean, they don't have them in schools yet, but they should have classes where kind of, you get emotionally attuned classes where they can sit, they could do something like this and talk about feelings.
Well, do you remember when we were kids? I mean, well, not when you were kids. Did you have the around sexual consent, the have a cup of tea? Have a cup of tea. That was made by Blue Zoo in 2013.
I definitely didn't have that. Have a cup of tea. What, to say yes to sex?
If a girl wants a cup of tea, make her a cup of tea. But if when you bring her the tea, she doesn't want the cup of tea, don't force her to have the cup of tea. I mean, it's like, what? Can you imagine my kids seeing that? And it's like, that was a line drawing. It probably cost the best part of $20,000-$30,000 to produce. Any kid can knock that out in a lunch break on their mobile phones right now. I mean, we should be doing, or they could be doing, the most fantastic anime cartoons, in order to explore these ideas. And yet, where's the education system? Well, why aren't we doing this?
Well, I was just thinking when Minta was talking about the application with art and play therapists.
Yes.
This is a new tool in their kit, really, isn't it? It's a new thing they can bring to the table, whether that, they've got sand, they've got modeling, they've got all of these different tools. Lego is being used in a therapeutic and play context. I also think animation, having that ability to bring out something, because for so many children who are neurodivergent, they have creativity that transcends, kind of the standard level. So yeah, I think it's really fascinating.
It's been lovely to see you again, Quint. Thank you so much for joining us on our podcast.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And Emma, it's lovely to meet you again as well. And thank you for getting me thinking about it all, and for giving me the space to talk to you about it. It's really exciting.